They get their Paperchain wallet, comes with a card, they start streaming on Spotify, and they start getting paid every day. So rather than what's happening right now, where it's months or quarters that they're waiting for payments, artists can now access their content income as they generate it. And it's really built around this idea that, the speed at which you can create and consume content right now is so rapid, but the payment cycles hadn't really caught up. And so the original idea behind Paperchain was always just, well, how do you make the speed of payments operate at the same speed as content creation and consumption? And so that's what we put into market. And it's been, we paid out $1 million using this mechanism so far. And again, it's just enabled creators to be able to access their income as they generate it and reinvest it as they need it to, whether it's marketing, production, or even just daily expenses like gas or rent.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by IndiePRO.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. This is episode 216. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy. With me this week are my co-host, Mr. Ed Isola, and Mr. Kyle Circle-Lemaire. What's up, guys? Thanks for being here.
No problem.
Absolutely.
I'm super excited. We've got a special guest for this week's episode, and this has been kind of the penultimate episode, I think, of this arc that we've done on Web3 and music. And so I'm super excited on behalf of Ed and Cirque as well, and everybody here at Creative Juice and IndiePRO to welcome Daniel Dewar from Paperchain here to the show. Daniel, what's going on, man? Thank you so much for jumping on.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for having me on. And it feels like a huge, you've really stepped up the expectations here, the penultimate one. So hopefully we'll live up to it. We'll try.
The heat is on, man. Well, thank you so much for being here. So I wanted to kind of kick things off just to give our listeners a little bit of information about you and Paperchain for anyone who may not know. We kind of have been covering over the past, like I mentioned, over the past few episodes, we've been talking a little bit about Web3, and we've been honestly teasing this episode and this interview with you throughout the whole process. So this has kind of been an exciting sort of peek to the arc. But yeah, just for anyone who doesn't know who you are and doesn't know what Paperchain is all about, I'd love for you to kind of give us the lay of the land of what you do and how you got to where you're at.
Cool. So the easiest way to think about Paperchain is it's an instant payments wallet for creators. Right now we're active in the music industry, so working with Spotify artists. So for artists that are using Paperchain, they get their Paperchain wallet, comes with a card, they start streaming on Spotify, and they start getting paid every day. So rather than what's happening right now, where it's months or quarters that they're waiting for payments, artists can now access their content income as they generate it. And it's really built around this idea that, the speed at which you can create and consume content right now is so rapid, but the payment cycles hadn't really caught up. And so the original idea behind Paperchain was always just, well, how do you make the speed of payments operate at the same speed as content creation and consumption? And so that's what we put into market. And it's been, we paid out $1 million using this mechanism so far. And again, it's just enabled creators to be able to access their income as they generate it and reinvest it as they need it to, whether it's marketing, production, or even just daily expenses like gas or rent. It's just about what can we do to give artists and creators more ownership or access to what's the easiest and fastest way they can access their content income. Just to round that off into how this intersects with Web3, I think we can probably talk a little bit more about it throughout the episode, but our backend is using decentralized finance protocols to actually enable this, which is a bit of a different take to how different other protocols are looking at it and the way we look at data. It's just simply a matter of being able to tap into the data streams from the streaming platforms and be able to turn them really into digital assets that can be financed through these different protocols. So there's a lot, there's a lot of mechanics and mechanisms at play there, but that is at a very high level what's happening on the back end that enables us to do these instant payouts.
So cool.
Yeah, this is super cool because I just kind of went through a situation where we had something go hugely viral and it was like, oh, that's nice, but we're not going to see the money for 4 months, and so you kind of hit that backlog of well, we want to keep making content, but we can't. So yeah, I know we're going to get into how it works and all that kind of stuff. So I'm super pumped to hear about it.
Well, that was like, that was part of the original impetus. A long time ago, I was a sound engineer. I was a mixed record engineer working in music studios back in Australia. And, I was working on the production side of things, and with artists and management and label teams there, it was like, we'll shoot the next video when the YouTube check comes in, or, we'll do the next production session when the Spotify check comes in. That's just the nature of the game. There's always cash that needs to be outlaid. And in the current music system in particular, it's like that's all covered by advances. Labels will give out advances to go against that. But, for most artists, you could end up in a position where, none of that gets recouped. So as an artist, you actually don't end up making any money off any of your sales. There's some recent, news about the major labels forgiving, unrecouped balances for old legacy catalog artists from like maybe before 2000. But then you think about that, that's artists who have never recouped their balances from pre-2000. It's like 22 years ago.
And it's just the legacy ones. It's like, you've paid your dues. You've been in prison long enough.
Right. Yeah, that's servitude for 30, 40 years. We'll just forgive that debt. And then now that we've made most of the wealth off it, you can sort of have what's left. It's like,
It's also like a velocity of money thing. It's like, it's like future value of money rather, right? Because it's like, well, we gave it up, so it's fine. But it's like, the use of it at the time it was generated, that value is so important. And I don't think artists are conditioned to even think about the time value of money,
Yeah, no, that's the other part of it too. It's like time value of money. And to your point, Ed, like, something does go viral, and what do you do? It's like you can, you can put it on credit card debt. That's, or, in the music sense, it's probably like, oh, well, if I can get a label deal, maybe I can get an advance. But then that can lead to a whole other sort of issues in terms of like ownership and having to give up like IP and copyrights and things like that. Whereas if there's something like this is available, and it's like something does go viral, and it's like, okay, well, that money's available now, and we can use it to capitalize on it, whatever is, marketing or promotion strategy or tactic we want to use. The money's there and available for us to use. And, we've always just felt that's the way it should be.
We've talked a lot in this arc about tokenizing things, basically like thinking of tokenization as like abstracting something. So you take it in its form and you give it new characteristics by tokenizing it, travel at the speed of light, those kinds of characteristics that come with making something like an internet data structure. And I heard you talking about like, well, here's why you might want your money sooner. Maybe you want to invest, maybe you want this, maybe you want that. But it's also like, why not just, we get to enjoy commerce in the way that any other business gets to enjoy commerce, or like you pay me and I get the money,
Yeah. So, it's funny because one of the co-founders here, he ran his own label. He launched this back in like the late 90s, I think 98 or 99. And when he set up the label, that was the original idea with his artists, was that, I'm going to pay them every 2 weeks really, and put them on a humane pay cycle. And that was his word he was always using, was this idea of a humane pay cycle. It's like, I can either give them the advances, but I know what happens when artists get advances and the money runs out, and then you're just like waiting 9 months to get the next check. Or it's like, I can write off the advance, but I'm actually just going to pay it out every 2 weeks. And, we all punch, the same clock, and we're all working at the label, and everyone works together. And so it was like kind of interesting, but that was like his philosophy that sort of brought it here too, and came full circle. Is that, well, if, it does require a rethink on the business side of it, but if everyone's aligned and agrees on that same sort of like as an ethical or moral decision that artists and creators just should have access to income because everyone else does, then there's no reason why this is not something that should be normal. This shouldn't be abnormal. This should be the normal.
That's super interesting that it kind of came full circle for you guys in that way.
Yeah, that seems to be the philosophical ethos of like this kind of technology, what it frees up.
Yeah, well, he actually ended up building his own royalty accounting platform, to help him do that, because the stuff at the time wasn't really set up to do those kinds of payments on that sort of cycles. Everything was set up to do like half yearly or, quarterly sort of payments. And so he had to build his own royalty accounting software platform. That actually ended up being more of a viable business than the label. And so he shut down the label and started selling that platform. He sold it to most of the main distributors, and ended up being acquired by Exactuals last year or something like that. So it's had a long life, that platform, but, it was all just then about, okay, well, at the onset of that was, when he went through it in like the early 2000s, and I was still in school then, but when he was going through that, it was like the onset of digital. So like just ingesting all of this new data files from iTunes and then streaming in the late 2000s. And so when I first met him, it was sort of like, this was the background he was coming from. He's like, I know the data is all there. It's just like, how can we do something more interesting with it? And, we even back in like 2012, we spoke about this idea of using this data to create like micro factoring models, because, the data that makes up all the monetization models for modern media, whether it's like, streams or views or clicks or impressions, it's all available. It's just a matter of leveraging it in a way where you could potentially create different financial products or different financial access through it. And, we talked about it like, 10 years ago, and the general model was there because it's something that's been done before in other industries, but there were some gaps missing on the finance side and also gaps like API access. So we kind of let it be for a while. In 2016, when I first started reading about Ethereum and this idea that you could turn anything into a digital asset, I thought, well, this is like a really interesting use case, because, what if you could take, and particularly at the time, that was when decentralized finance was like coming about, and you could take your crypto and put it up as collateral and things like that. And so I just started thinking, well, what if instead of cryptocurrencies, what if you could take, say, Spotify data and say, okay, this data is proof of future payment. Can we collateralize this and be able to leverage some of these protocols and be able to do it? And, that was the early genesis for it. And it's taken many years to sort of iterate on that and for the technology to be where we can use it. And that's sort of been the model we've been using for the last 2 years now to make payments.
I think that's like an important point to hinge on, is like, because I was explaining this in a workshop we did on Web3, and someone was like, whoa, be careful, you're signing away. And I was like, no, it's the opposite. You're not signing away. You're not increasing the velocity of money by signing away rights, which is how it's done today. The only way you can act like any other form of commerce is by signing away tons of your rights. It's huge market inefficiency. But with this, you're just saying, here's proof positive that I have this amount coming to me. We'll discount. So like, it's like you could buy my royalty statement and maybe you might pay less than the royalty statement is worth, but you're getting a discount on that money because you're giving it to me today instead of next year. And all you're signing away is that statement, not the actual rights to the songs, not any future value that might come about through streaming, just that exact block of listens, right?
Yeah, it's just dealing with the cash flow. And that's kind of where we always wanted to maintain focus, to just focus on the money. As soon as you start getting into rights, then you're just, if we did that, we would have just backed ourselves back into being a label or some sort of weird distribution model, which is what we didn't want to do. So we just want to stay focused on the cash, and that's it. It's like you said, you're just focusing on this data that's worth this. This is what's being like sold or monetized. And then once that sort of recoupment or reconciliation cycle happens, that's it. End of transaction.
I mean, that's super interesting. And like thinking about the cash flow process, like inside of streaming, I think for a lot of especially newer artists is, it's a totally new sort of ballpark in a lot of ways, so I'm curious, Daniel, like just for anyone who might be listening that doesn't have their head wrapped around even what exists right now for the vast majority of artists, what's the process like, and where does Paperchain kind of fit into it from like a step-by-step kind of mode?
It's interesting, but also kind of, let's say, a not great thing about the music industry is as an artist, you don't have the ability to interact or deal directly with the platforms. Like you can't, as an artist, go and say, I'm going to distribute my content to Spotify and Spotify is going to pay out to me. It can't happen. You can do that with YouTube. You can do it with all these other content platforms, but you can't do it with music streaming. And I mean, there's a number of reasons for that. Some of them are reasonable and some of them is not so reasonable, but you have to go through either a label or you have to go through a distribution company. So these are companies that are designed to distribute your content and your catalog to thousands of different stores around the world. They also help aggregate all of the collection of the payments from all these platforms and then just give it to you in one single payment. So there is value in them being able to provide that kind of service. But what that means as an artist is when you're generating your streams or really just generating your income, that is being whatever monthly period you're in, and probably the best case scenario, say you're distributing and selling and monetizing on Spotify, where in April right now, the best case scenario is you're getting paid for April in, June? At the end of June, probably. So that's your best case. Yeah, 2 months. That's probably the fastest you could get paid. So even though A lot of the distributors have now just moved to monthly payments. They were not so long ago quarterly. So now they've just moved to monthly, but you're still 2 months behind the cycle. So your actual cash isn't really representative of what's happening in market right now. And that's where the discrepancy occurs and the challenges around how to, being able to access timely money as you need it in investment. So, that's your best case scenario. Where we fit into that is what we're doing is we're just connecting in through the distributor and being able to start tracking all of the streams. So what we've been doing over the past 3 or 4 years is not only looking at streaming data from all of variety of different artists through labels and distributors, but also historical accounting and statement data too. So we've been able to build a learning model that allows us to fairly accurately predict what a payout rate is for any given artist at any given time. So when we get the streaming data, we can quickly make a conversion from looking at just streams and turning it into an actual dollar amount. So we can say right now within a margin of 1% to 2% error, say, okay, these streams are worth $1.87, or these streams are worth $503.30. Become quite accurate at that. And then with that information, now that we can recognize the revenue, it's just simply a matter of getting financed and paying it out. But that also, sort of identifies what the other problem is that streaming isn't priced. So there's no fixed rate for streaming. That happens sort of after the fact. So we're in April right now. As an artist, you're generating all of your streams. You don't actually know what the dollar value is of those streams until the end of next month when Spotify issues a statement and says, okay, these streams were worth $100, $1,000, $10,000, whatever they were. That changes month to month based on a variety of different factors, how many streams you generated, which territories they were generated in, whether they were ad supported, subscription supported, whether they were bundled, which distribution, or which sort of what your sort of floor and ceilings are on your streaming rates. All those things factor in that on a monthly basis, you've got this dynamic streaming rate. And so that means that you're immediately 30 days behind knowing what your actual dollar value is in market. And then there's another 30 days on top of that to actually handle the payments of those. So, we built that model so we could price things faster even before Spotify does. And so now that we have it, again, it allows us to just make payments a long time before anybody else can.
It's so cool.
Yeah. It does Spotify, and what other platforms do you guys work with? Or is it just Spotify?
We've been working with Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube as well, doing music streaming on YouTube. We've generally found, and we do have some data access to Deezer and others, but we found majority of the income are those 3 platforms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Earlier you were noting how you can't interact directly with these platforms. And I think there's sort of a unifying theory about all this that we've been sort of lightly touching on throughout this arc of episodes, where it's because ideas are so different from this can of Red Bull, right? They're so fundamentally different as property that you end up in this place where our governments regulate how those ideas can be monetized and who owns them and what the ownership and transfer and exchange of them is. And then you end up in a place where there's all this regulatory sort of bloat in the payment rails. Getting the money back involves a lot of collection agencies, some of which are regulated, some of which are self-nominated. And then, that really creates this sort of period of waiting, where now we have an industry where that period, that lag has become such a place where a lot of larger entities can capitalize. They can come in and speculate on what your future value is with almost no competition. There's no one else setting these rates. They're just saying, we think you're worth $100,000 advance, and that's what we're willing to risk. And then you kind of just have to accept that. Whereas now I feel this implementation that you've been working on and that you've created is creating a competitive market for what should you bid on that time span? What should an artist be worth? And that competition introduces fairer circumstances for artists in a way that just isn't possible when ownership of IP is at stake when they're bidding on what they should give you to subsidize your lifestyle while you're waiting for checks to come in.
I mean, yeah, and we haven't even touched on publishing, right? We're just dealing with recording revenues for the artist, which, again, that's, best case scenario, it's 2 months behind, but that's as fast as it gets. Then you talk about publishing, and that's dealing with completely different entities and different PROs and CMOs. And I mean, that can take up to 18 months for that sort of reconciliation to happen. So, right. Yeah, that gets even worse. So there's so much information asymmetry, and that is being taken advantage of from like a one-sided play. It's set up in a way that it makes it very difficult for artists to sort of break through and find and be able to have sustainable careers. And even when you do, it's very easy to fall into traditional business model or financial model traps that the music industry has laid out and operated on for decades now.
Speaking of business model and financial model traps, like I'm curious from your perspective, what is the educational process for Paperchain been like up to this point? With there being so many blurry lines and kind of like not clear information out there in the model that artists currently have to operate within, what has the kind of like education and onboarding process been like for you guys, for artists that you have worked with, to break out of those kinds of old paradigms?
Yeah, it's interesting because part of it also comes down to the teams that are surrounding the artists, and we've definitely like had really good experiences with artists and their management teams who are pretty switched on and thinking about what this means for their business. And I think if you find, particularly on the independent side, if you're finding artists that are breaking through and are staying independent, they've usually got a really, really great manager and business partner working with them who's operating on the same wavelength and thinking about the same things in terms of how do we make our business run better. But we do try to keep it very simple in that, again, it's just about payments. Like you connect the data, but in most cases where we've worked with distributors, like last year we did a partnership with United Masters. And so in that sense, all the backend data integration is done. As an artist, you just open up your Paperchain wallet, you get the card, and the payments just start working. And that's it. It's just payments. Everything else is taken care of on the back end. And then the way we thought about fee structuring as well is we charge fees to the distributor or the content platform or whoever the other entity is. And so again, that keeps it cleaner for the artist because there's no fees being charged to them from Paperchain. We charge it to the distributor or the content platform because we believe they have a lot to gain out of offering a product like this. And so ultimately we believe this should be a no cost money product for the artists and creators. And again, that keeps it very clean too, because I don't have to think about what that impact means or how that influences like any sort of future decision making. It's just cash flow that you have access to, and it's yours to access and spend or withdraw or invest, however you want to use it. And we think that's been like a really clean approach, and it's been quite successful so far. The first, I would say, prototype we built, it was more token based. So we had, it was a full like Web3 dApp, MetaMask integration. As an artist, you could go in and select like specific songs you wanted to finance and publish it to a marketplace. And then as a buyer, you could go into a marketplace and actually select which songs and artists you wanted to sort of finance. But this was in 2018. And so it was kind of like, I think the knowledge gap was like quite huge back then. And people were like, what's MetaMask? What are tokens? Like, oh, what's Ethereum? I don't understand any of this. And so for us, we're just, okay, let's just scrap all of that, take it all out. All of that happens on the back end. And now the artists, you just get money in your wallet and you can spend it, and that's it.
But then DeFi summer happened, and nowadays we've got all these people on chain using MetaMask. Does that kind of change your perspective on that move where you guys decided to fade that into the background?
Yeah, because now it's sort of we can have better conversations with it. And I think, when we even talk to users and do polling and things like that, we talk about like, features and support, stuff like that. We've done ones where nobody's really interested in things like rewards or, cash back or like any sort of traditional things associated with a card, but they want crypto support. Because not only just because, more artists are monetizing in Web3 and selling NFTs. And so they're getting ETH payments or USDC payments or whatever, but also because they just see the ability to, I guess, make more or do more with their cash in the Web3 world than what they can in traditional banking system. Like even us, like we're tied in terms of like the sort of like interest rates you could, earn on your funds, because that's whatever our sponsor bank has is like 0.15% or whatever. It might even be a little less than that. Whereas if you could just get something as a stable coin and do a simple, staking or yield generation contract, you could get 7 or 8% in the Web3 space. A lot of people are looking at it for different opportunities and ways, again, they can just incorporate that into just having a better money product. So it's not just about access, but it's like, what's a better reinvestment strategy? And so for us, it becomes quite clear then. It's like, and so we're already working on, adding wallet support so you can sign in with MetaMask and you can view not only your Web2 content income, but then your Web3 wallet can exist beside that as well. And then we're starting to work on ways where you can make it really easy then to move funds in and out of each. So into USD, into USDC, or into your crypto wallet. And then the end result being, how can I spend this money and be able to settle it to the crypto wallet? And that'll just make it as seamless as possible. So again, we'll always try to keep it as easy a process as possible because it just helps with the onboarding. But there's definitely a lot more appetite to incorporate that side of the product than what there was, say, 3 or 4 years ago.
Even from like a stack building perspective, it's like there's so much opportunity, I guess, like so much capability when you abstract these things, where it's like it's a lot easier from an implementation perspective to give someone their like set it and forget it, money comes to your bank account, alongside more complex, mechanisms that people could use, like stay on chain,
Well, I think, one of the ways I talk to it with artists is like the most important thing in terms of like being paid on chain. If we were to start making payments and you having this wallet, particularly a custodial wallet, something that you own the keys for, the most important thing about that is it's really just introducing you to the wallet, which is probably the most important piece, because that wallet is, that's your ID now. That is it's not really a wallet in a sense. It's more like a passport or an access key that grants you, access to financial products or future social networks or future media networks. Like this is your thing that's going to be able to really make not only like your income, but any sort of content you're monetizing. This is how it becomes interoperable with all these other different markets and networks. So I think that's the most valuable piece, is that we can introduce and onboard people into having the wallets. That's the key that opens up the entire market for them. And so the money is a way to get there, but the real value is just introducing this concept of these wallets that are now your key to the next, like, I don't know, they say the metaverse, which is like kind of stupid, but it's really the key to whatever verses are coming next.
Well, it's like, so for any indies out there wondering what he's talking about, this is my hardware wallet. It's a ledger, and it's connected to an Ethereum account address. And not only do I have, all my tokens in there, but any app I interact with is storing data about my address on their side. So I can later interact with it and they can prove that of these previous interactions, there's like a history of use. Soon we're looking at things like, your identification will be on chain in this way and bound to that wallet. And your artwork and even your IP and past interactions you've had in the physical world and in the digital world, all accruing back to that wallet, being like proof positive that, you are who you are, you've done what you've done. And that's what you're speaking to, right? Is like getting people onboarded to that concept.
Yeah. That's the real powerful piece. And I think that's where like the real value in Web3 that everyone talks about, that's to me is like, that's the huge opportunity that's at play here. I think, the onboarding, or at least the rails to get on and off, like into fiat and the crypto is still like pretty, it's still very messy. But, I think there's ways of being improved there. Stripe reached out to us when we started thinking about building this product. And so they partnered with us to actually put this product into market, which was like for us is a good sign, because for a while, Stripe were starting to support Bitcoin, I think maybe in like 2018, and then they stopped it because a lot of their sponsor banks weren't comfortable with it. But now that Stripe is, they have a crypto team now. So now that they're investing in that space and, working out ways to make it easier to move in and out and connect their different products together, I think that's going to help a lot in terms of being able to get money in and out of those systems and make that really seamless, because at the moment there is a lot of friction there. Even if you think about like Coinbase, and it's a very easy way to create a wallet, but the fees they charge, and it's just like, there's got to be a better way than that. Like that's another example of like people taking advantage and being able to just, there's so much fat for them to take out of that and charge a premium to charge you $100 to get your money out of Coinbase kind of thing. It's just like, there's got to be a better way to do that. So first step is really just onboarding, but then just working on better ways to implement that exchange between like, fiat and crypto, and how that can become much more seamless. Like that'll be like probably something we're working on towards the end of this year. Next step for us is just getting people onboarded and opening up some wallets.
So I think for any of our listeners that might be trying to connect the dots here, Daniel, you mentioned initially when we kind of kicked off the episode at the top, how the blockchain is involved with Paperchain, but just kind of to help us understand where that all comes into play in the back end, like what's actually going on, what's happening, how is that sort of powering what you guys are doing as far as speeding up the velocity of cash?
Yeah. So, I mentioned earlier this idea in decentralized finance was, lending, which is a way you could do, peer-to-peer or programmatic lending, in that you could, these protocols were being set up that would allow you to collateralize your assets. And in this case, it was just dealing with crypto. So you could take your ETH and say, okay, I have, 5 ETH. I'm going to collateralize it into your protocol. And that will give me back, depending on what their, ratios were like, but that could give me back, say, I don't know, like $20,000 or something like that, depending on what the price of ETH is. But that happened in a very programmatic way. You weren't dealing, there was no individual on the other side. It was just machine to machine. It's like, as long as you met this criteria, you were able to then, in a matter of minutes, say, okay, here's my ETH, I lock it up here, and now I have $20,000 or 20,000 USDC or DAI or whatever. That's how, like, MakerDAO, which was like the protocol that we first started working with, that's how it operates. You would take your ETH and then you would just get DAI in return, which is a programmatic stable coin that you can redeem 1-to-1 to the US dollar. They started expanding outside of ETH and started introducing different collateral types. And, it was around that time that we always thought the way, the pathway for a lot of these protocols is to get outside of the crypto ecosystem, is they had to start accepting or working with real world assets. And a lot of people on the team, felt the same way. And so around, I think it was like early 2019, started working on this idea that, again, what if instead of taking you cryptocurrencies like ETH as collateral, what if we could take like a Spotify stream and say, okay, the stream is worth $100 and it's going to get paid out in 60 days time. Can we use that as collateral to then draw out of your protocol as well? And that's the general idea behind it. I think the steps to get there is that stream or that data has to be represented as a digital asset. So what we actually do is we turn this data into NFTs. Now, an NFTs in our process or flow, these aren't collectibles, these aren't media or anything like that. These aren't PFPs. They're really just like synthetic receivables or proof of future payments. And so you have these NFTs, which are really just like, okay, this NFT represents $10,000 worth of Spotify data. It's going to get paid in 60 days time. So I'm going to pledge this NFT to this protocol and get back $10,000, or in our case, $9,000. And so from that, we'll get 9,000 DAI from the protocol. We then convert that into USD, and then we'll deposit or route the USD into the user's account. One of the reasons why we also think it's advantageous that we can start onboarding people is that we don't have to do that final conversion right now. So we use trading desks to convert, which can introduce some delay in terms of getting it out of DAI and into USD. In an ideal sense, we have our users routed to like smart contracts. And so it's like the ownership of each asset is tied to that. So we can immediately get the DAI, and then that can immediately be routed to all of the different parties that are tied to that asset. In an ideal sense, like that's the most automated way we could do it. And what I find really interesting and like powerful about it is, again, it's all programmatic and it's something that happens on demand. If you think about how this works in the traditional finance world, this is like a very old model. It's like factoring receivables. You take your invoices. As a company doing what we do, you would go to a bank and say, hey, I need a $20 million facility. And I'm going to use it to buy these invoices for all these different companies. And, that's the way it would work in the traditional world, but you already have that $20 million facility. So for us, if we were to do it that way, we then really have the liability of managing and maintaining that $20 million facility, which means we have like minimum drawdowns we need to meet. And if we don't, then we get penalized for that. It means that if we have to do any sort of refinancing, there's like certain costs associated with that as well. So there's a big liability in terms of managing that $20 million facility. And what it means is for a company like us is that we would then have to optimize our business to allocate that facility. Like that would be our number one thing. It's just like, we have to find a way to deploy this $20 million, because if we don't, it's going to be chewing up so many extra costs for us.
And that means more fees for the users on both end, right?
Right, exactly. Because then there's more, you have to find ways to cover it. So it ultimately just goes down to the end user and say, well, you're being now penalized for this inefficient use of capital by getting charged 25, 30% interest on something which should not cost that much. Whereas in this world, in this sense, because it's on demand, then we just use it as we need it to. There's no contractual obligations there. There's no like drawdown contractual obligations. There's not even like a vendor lock-in. So if we didn't, we could build this and replicate it with like 10 different protocols and just go about like finding the best capital at the best price point and do it in a very programmatic way. Like there's just more flexibility for us in terms of being able to access it. And because these pools are existing and they've already got like, $8-10 billion of sort of liquidity sitting in their pools, it's sort of like we don't have to worry about, making sure there's enough liquidity there. There's more than enough to sort of meet our demand. Now, what it means is that, because it's there and it just works, it means that we then optimize our business for the wallet and payment side of things. So we're not a company that's optimizing ourselves for lending. We're a company that's optimizing ourselves for payments.
And that's kind of cool. Like the cool abstract value in DeFi is that like you have all these borrowing and lending pools. They can abstract the collateral. And so it's like that key infrastructure is already built for you. You just come and plug in your collateral type to it and it's there. For any indies out there who might be like cross-eyed right now or like, what the hell are they talking about? Basically, like when I first interacted with Paperchain, I found out about it in like late 2020 and I immediately tweeted like everyone I knew at Distributors. I was like, do this. I was like, I immediately like, neurons started firing off. I was like, this is so important. And through my research, like in the subsequent year, I found out about Centrifuge, Tin Lake. I don't know if you guys are still using Centrifuge, but Centrifuge is like a big investment pool protocol for real world assets. So let's say you have a house, you have a deed to your house, and now you can tokenize that as like an NFT. The NFT is what's called a Ricardian contract. So it involves a real world contract and a blockchain smart contract. They're linked to each other, Ricardian contract. So you put it on the chain. You say this deed to my house is virtualized now. So I can then deposit this NFT into someone else's custody. Someone else has control over it and they give me money in return. If I don't pay back the loan, they have the deed to my house now, so they can go sell it to pay themselves back. And what Paperchain is doing is they're bundling together these royalty statements and putting that up as collateral in much the same way as I described with a house. What that does though, is it completely, I see this as like a sort of like an ounce of cure is worth a pound of prevention in this case. Cause it's like when you solve this little speed of money thing for artists, it wipes out so much inefficiency and sort of toxicity in the music industry. And that's just the streaming side. I'm wondering, like, do you guys have designs for maybe like the publishing side and other places where there's these like glaring inefficiencies?
I was just going to ask the same thing. Like, is that something that's on the horizon for you guys? And if not, what do you see on the horizon?
I think we'll probably look to expand in more high velocity channels, particularly, anywhere where there is like good access to this kind of data and the flow of money is quite quick. Because I think, the challenge that comes into publishing is that the flow of funds isn't as quick. And so you've not only like, it's not as simple as saying like, okay, we're paying out this to these songwriters and then we're collecting from Spotify or we're collecting from, one entity. It's like there's so many different entities that you could potentially be collecting from. And so that's where, for us at least, that integration piece, like, and being able to talk to all these different collecting agencies, like that's the biggest, challenge for us in terms of being able to scale. And so the more complexity there, it just means it just makes us much more slower. Whereas if we can expand into areas or different channels like YouTube or even others like Twitch and, whether it's like Patreon or Substack or anywhere where there's like somewhere we can record just like sales or get sales data and be able to integrate it, I think we can be much more fast moving there. TikTok and Snapchat and things like that, if we can unlock those revenue protocols, again, the money flows a little bit more faster. There's not as much transparency there, but it's a bit of a juicier creator segment to be able to tap into. Publishing, not only is it, there's a lot of friction points in terms of the collection side of things, but then also the record keeping of ownership is also far worse than what the recording industry side is too. So there's just a lot of things in publishing that make us be like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Because the more you dig into publishing, you have to start building publishing tools that sort of interface with all these different publishing platforms. And the more you get into that, the more you sort of like get stuck into being like, okay, this is now a publishing tool. And I don't want that for the platform.
That's a really interesting idea that thought hadn't even crossed my mind. The potential to tap into some of the flow of revenue in membership type platforms like Patreon, like you said. That's really interesting.
It's also like a very old promise of blockchain. Like I remember in 2017 watching talks from Andreas Antonopoulos talking about streaming money. And, my thoughts immediately went to music because like music streaming was already a thing. And it's like, yeah, like what if as you're listening to my song, money is streaming from your wallet into mine? That's the kind of like world that this technology could create.
It's interesting because I think people are trying to solve this, particularly in music, from so many different angles. And we have the audiences, and I think even in the wider like online space, there's like Coil, which runs on like Ripple's Interledger. I don't know if everyone really takes much of Ripple very seriously, but that's always been the idea of like these this idea of streaming money, and there's even different like products out there that do stream money. But the thing I've noticed about that is, one, it sort of requires you to have either the money up front, or you have to sort of make up your own money in the form of a token, and something that doesn't exist, because otherwise, particularly in the music space, there's nothing to actually pay out at the time the stream occurs. Like there's no money. So you would have to then, for that to sort of work, you would have to say, well, Spotify, you have to already have the money on hand before the stream has occurred, so that when it happens, you can pay it out immediately. And so, now you're sort of talking about, companies being able to be capitalized with billions of dollars on their balance sheet. And I know Spotify does, but, it's not a very realistic value proposition at the streaming sense. And so that's why Audius can work, although I don't think that's fully monetizing yet. But when you sort of make up your own token, you can sort of do what you want with it and say, okay, yeah, there's like more supply. And when someone streams, maybe it mints a new token and you get paid with that or whatever. It probably complicates the economics a little, or the tokenomics a little bit. But yeah, that's the only challenge around this idea of streaming money, is like, where does that initial flow of funds come from? And you either have to create it artificially, or someone has to have that money up front. And that's sort of been the challenge to having that actually adopted across the industry.
Even bigger is like, users have it pretty sweet with Spotify. Good luck getting them to switch over to your streaming money platform. It's going to be a very difficult challenge. It's never been better as a music listener.
Yeah, that's the hard part, right? Is that, that's one of the challenges around building it. And I think it's great that Audio still exists, because there was plenty in 2017. There's plenty of other streaming platforms that sort of came about and they no longer exist. So the fact that Audio is still going is great. The challenge is like, you have to attract a consumer audience, but you don't have much catalog. So that makes it hard. But then you have to attract catalog, but you don't have much of a streaming audience. So that's also like, that's the other side of it. And so, again, I think it's great that they still exist. But the challenge, again, is that you could go and as a startup raise $5 million, but, Spotify spends 5 times that every month on marketing. So, your ability to then win mind share and market share just becomes so much more difficult.
Yeah, big time. I was wondering about, when I first heard of Paperchain, my interest in it. I mean, it's grown in scope a lot, but originally I was in a place where it was like, I want to create a group that is decentralized in terms of collaborators. So like, you can come on and you just like, there's no human decision involved in whether or not you end up, except for like maybe majority decision as to whether your contribution should be added to what's already been done on a song. But otherwise, you can come contribute. And as long as everyone else wants it, there's no like single point of failure that's going to tell you no. Mm. Problem being like, how do you get people to know that they don't have to rely on a human for accounting, getting their payouts, getting their, their registrations, their royalties, all that. And I thought about like programmable money. Like Ed, for instance, has a band, and everyone who's part of this band has some claim to like some revenue to some degree. That all comes into a centralized bank account. The bank account is not necessarily owned by everybody at once. And so like, how that all works is very messy. And furthermore, if anyone's wronged in that transaction, they have to pursue their rights in court. Whereas with like a code is law environment, you could implement a smart contract where it's like all the 502 streaming payments come into this contract. Paperchain sends it to them. And the contract is like, its account is like, let's say it's on Anchor and it's gaining, 19% APY. So it's growing by 19% every year. But then let's say Ed wants his to actually go and dynamically buy Ethereum. He wants his in Ethereum, but he doesn't want it all in one chunk. He wants it to purchase it, every hour, every day. Mm-hmm. like these are the types of things that are possible with programmable money. And that's like a whole other side to this that I find so interesting. And there's so much potential there. Has that been a part of like your development track or something that like you guys talk a lot about in ideation?
It is in the, as we think about like what that Web3 experience looks like is like, what does it look like to, route payments to users? Is it something that's automatic, or is it, to your point, is something that gets then sent to a centralized, even it could be like a band, or could it even be something that's like a label? And so all the label funds go to this contract. But as an artist, you can at any point go and connect your wallet and almost like, withdraw your stake if you'd like. So that sort of like, again, gives you a bit more autonomy over how you access your income. It sort of introduces friction in that there's an actual action you have to take, and it doesn't just work. But to your point, these are the sort of interesting things. And, I think one of the really cool things as well is that this is what a lot of artists are thinking about as well. So this, there is a bit of concern that, well, if it requires some work, then it may make it a bit harder to adopt. But I've spoken to so many artists who, these are the things they want to play around with. These are sort of like the tooling they want to do. It's like, well, I don't want all of it now. Can I put some of it elsewhere here? And how do we build like products that can sort of enable that? So that's sort of like conversations we're having on the Web3 side. And in general, it's happening in Web2 as well, because, distributors are starting to do splits. And so this idea of like, okay, well, we have an asset and there's like, maybe there's a song, there's an artist connected to that, but there's a producer and maybe there's a manager. And so, can they all start getting paid instantly? And, as long as we can capture the splits, we can do all of that. But to your point, when you take that into the Web3 and programmatic money side, there's just a lot more interesting financial products that you can sort of build and string around that as well. Yeah.
It'd be really cool to like go into my Paperchain interface and be like, all right, Chris wants his paid out to his bank account. So that's like the Web2 implementation. I want mine, put into this DeFi protocol from, with this claimable address, and like be able to sort of money Lego the whole thing so that, and then also add collaborators and, deal with percentages that way. It's, it seems to be like a great place for this all to go,
Yeah. And because I think, one of the really interesting things is that, like, I'd say the friction around money and payments is definitely why people are interested. This idea of instant payments is like why everyone signs up. It's like, this is what we want to solve. I do think that kind of goes away over time in certain respects, and particularly like in the case now with like NFT monetization, where you do get payments instantly. But in that period of time, I think where we win right now is we can really make a big difference with instant payments. But all that's doing is allowing us and giving us the space to be able to build better wallet tooling, so that when you are getting instant payments, for example, it's like that is something for a particular asset that may have collaborators attached to it. So we can build out the tooling that enables you to access that or allocate that much more efficiently, just like you put out there in your example.
What's been the challenge with getting distributors on board? Like, I know you said you guys partnered with United Masters. Have you been in talks with others? What's their temperature?
Yeah, there's a lot of interest. So we have like 4 or 5 in the pipeline. I think, to be honest, like part of it is they don't have people on their side who are sort of like owning this space yet. They see in the sense that there's nobody who's sort of looking at Web3 strategies. And if they are, it's sort of like there's people who are sort of already managing the space. And when they see like NFTs, it's really just kind of like, they see the money opportunity and not much else, right? It's like, can we sell some NFTs for an upcoming album release? And,
right.
We'll figure out a way to split that with the artist, but then that's kind of it. There's no bigger thought on how it sort of sits into a wider company. And so United Masters has been pretty cool in sort of how they've approached that. But on the other side, I think it really comes down to the integration side and how quickly they can, these distributors can move to sort of provide us with some of the tooling that we need. And what I mean by that is like, what we're doing is, while we're doing all of these payments, obviously, we're reconciling that to a ledger. We can make that information available via API, but on their side, they don't have the ability to then quickly spin out a team who can then interact with our API and then be able to say, okay, we can do and have that reflect in our royalty statements and things like that. That's probably like the number one friction point right now, is just figuring that out. And, we're working through some builds with a couple of like pipeline distributors right now. But the idea that, we can make it super easy for someone to be able to then have that reflected in their royalty account statement, because they still have to do that every month. And it does sound very simple, where all they need to do is just like factor in another, calculation in terms of like, oh, this is what's already been paid out, so it needs to be deducted from the statement. But to do that in a very automated way is like quite tricky. And so that's probably like the biggest friction point right now.
Cool. So it is there is like a technical challenge in addition to like a negotiational challenge.
Yeah. From like the economic side, I think people are pretty receptive to it. And, I think, people, especially like in the distribution space, it's tough, right? Because distribution is heavily commoditized. Differentiation is like very, very slim. Everyone talks about that they have the best networks, the great marketing and things like that. I think a lot of artists will find that, a lot of distributors don't actually deliver on that side of it in terms of like being able to do placements and things like that. I think
our community has gotten wise to that over a long period of time.
So everyone's looking for like, what's the next thing? And, for a while there, everyone was investing in building their own ad servers because they saw advertising as the next growth opportunity. And then the other side was just money. It's like, can we start doing different types of advances or different payment structures and things like that? So people are very interested in the space. I'd say one of the things I don't like, and it's not all distributors or even all labels, but there is this mentality, and I think the way the music industry has operated for a very long time is that you own everything. So it's like you lock everything down. So it's like we want to own the distribution stack, we want to own the marketing stack, we want to own the payment stack, we want to own this. So everything wants to be white labeled because they want this idea that there's different products that are actually servicing their clients well. And I just think that's like such an archaic way of looking at it. I think the story of like technology over the past like 20 years has been like microservices or micro products that are solving very specific problems. Yeah. But importantly, they're interoperable and interactive with each other. And that works a lot better than this idea that there's just this one platform that can do everything. And if you're tied to our distributor or tied to our label, you have to use everything as our brand and you're just stuck into this giant big stack. I just don't think it's a viable pathway. I think for innovation or for that's going to service or be in the best interest of the artists.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, even as a marketing agency, the number of requests that we get for white labeled services, where, and even in instances where there aren't any white labeling going on, the ability to interface with the artists and the creatives directly is so often blocked by multiple layers of people to talk to and bureaucracy and stuff like that. So yeah, even at the services level, we experience that.
Now, I know you still have to like meet with these people and play nice in a lot of ways, and like, can't be adversarial to the music industry at large. But like from my perspective, it's been like, if they don't change that I need to own the whole stack thing, if they don't become interoperable and modular, they're about to have all their lunch eaten in a very unceremonious, like drastic fashion, because like that's very much the major edge that's coming into the marketplace, is being that like dynamic economies of scale, be good at one thing, partner with others,
Yeah. And, again, the smarter ones will open up to that. But, we've found it, and, we've actually this month we've started. So, for a long time, we've just been building this giant wait list of people, and always like, well, we'll start onboarding you when we have, partnership with your distributor. But that's even become too much for us. We're just like, we just need to get people on board. So this month we've been started sending out invites to people, and we're opening up access. And by next month we'll have open up access, so anyone can come and create a wallet and access it. And depending on who you distribute it by, those things can be figured out. We have enough data now, and we have ways of tapping into the data that we'll be able to do what we can do and provide instant access to income. We can do that. We kind of had this idea for a long time that the pathway to growth is through the content platforms and the distributors. And I still do think that's the way to fully scale, is that you need those platforms to be able to just distribute the wallet out to everyone. But yeah, it just didn't happen quick enough. So we're just like, we're just going to open up access and start getting their users without them anyway. And then there'll be enough of their users on the platform where they'll have to use us.
I was going to ask, what can our listeners do? Do we call our senator? What do say, I want Paperchain now? How do we, sort of push that front?
We're going to add something in you could probably just go and sign up. I'll start seeing all the signups from like today and that sort of thing. And we can start sending out invites in the next couple of weeks. So we should be able to start onboarding pretty quickly and get people access. One of the things we'll probably add is just like, a simple way to email your distributor too. So you can select who your distributor is, And I have most of like the CEO's email, so you can just like trigger an automated email that says, "Hey, we want Paperchain." And in the meantime, we'll be able to start working with you anyway. But I think it'll be a better product if we can integrate with the distribution platforms. But it's at the point now where I don't think we need them, and we can start servicing without. And either they'll get on board and become a part of it. If not, I just think they'll get left behind. And to your point, the lunch will be eaten, and everyone else will be well fed.
Yeah, man. So Ed, you heard that. You just go sign up. You get an automated mail to link.
I got it. I've written it down and I'm ready to go.
Hell yeah. Well, do you gents have any other questions? I've been kind of hogging the question space because I'm just super nerdy about all this stuff.
No, that was actually the next question that I was going to ask Daniel was for artists that are trying to get involved with Paperchain, what is the process like right now? It sounds like they go through the waitlist process. Do you guys have a self-service kind of option or process planned for the future? What's that looking like? Or is it just like waitlist, get accepted?
Right now, for the next hopefully no more than 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, it'll still be just going into the waitlist as we start. We're doing batches every week in terms of invites, but fully expect by the middle of May that it'll just be go and sign up, so anyone can sign up.
That's exciting. That's really exciting. I had one other question for you. I saw this, I think, on the roadmap on your website under what was coming soon. What's in the works as far as generating a yield off of the money that does come your way through Paperchain? What's kind of in place right now? What can artists expect from that? Because that's something that I feel like most creatives probably don't have at the forefront of their mind when it comes to the money that's coming in their way. What's kind of going on that front?
Yeah, so it's something we've talked about as we look at, if we can do the wallet integration and, the Web3 wallet integrations, and just sort of figure out what that process looks like. I think for a lot of cases, it has to be done in the aggregate. So for example, the smallest we pay out on a daily basis is 1 cent, which I think, if you're talking about crypto payments, you could probably go to far lower decimals, but generally we'll pay out 1 cent per day. So we have artists who get paid 1 cent per day. The largest artist right now is probably getting paid around $180 or $200 a day or something like that. So it's there's a good spread. I think, for the cases of where it's really small payments, the idea on that it's yield generating is potentially that I guess there's a community contract that all of this can be pulled into. And so as an aggregate that can start, just sitting there and accruing yield in some way. And similar to what we discussed earlier is then as a user, you could go in and then, claim your funds from that pool, or you can just let it sit there. Because, if you have 1 cent sitting there and you sort of okay, I'm going to connect it to this yield generating pool, I mean, it's going to be kind of useless, but if you can sort of sit in something much larger and be able to participate that way, that's probably the most straightforward way that we've thought about doing that. For a long time, we've talked about, doing community pools backed by some of the streams. And so can you reinvest and become some of the financing? So, right now we're getting the financing funds from MakerDAO, but can we create a community pool?
That'd be so cool.
And so you're reinvesting back and buying other artist income. And so you're earning a good, yield off that. And that becomes, not only the way you get paid, but also you make income by then financing other artist income as well.
That would be wild. The ecosystem kind of sustaining itself.
Right now, the music NFT space is very much like that, where an artist comes in, they sell an NFT for 9 ETH. They're I'll go buy someone else's. I'll pay it forward. And I think a lot about that. I would leave it on chain. I wouldn't even want to get it to my bank account. I'd leave it in your protocol if I could. Yeah.
So again, it's the concept of artists making money with money. It's just it's like the dream, right? So even though the concept is exciting, so to implement something like that would be incredible. And I think a lot of this wallet stuff is sort of at the back end of this quarter. So a couple of months away, we'll probably start testing out payments and things like that. Recently we actually ran a straw poll on Twitter, just asking about how would you want your payments? And there's probably a couple of ways you can sort of read the results. I think there was 4 options. It was Bitcoin, Lightning, Ethereum, stablecoin, or USD fiat. And I think it was 46% said fiat was the number one, but you could also read that as 54% said crypto. But I think for the time being, I think ETH is still the space we'll continue to build in. The Bitcoin Lightning stuff is kind of interesting, particularly the Lightning ATMs. But I think the ecosystem and especially in terms of the sort of products we need to build, I just don't think it has enough support there yet. So I think, we'll continue building in ETH and just working with different protocols in there. But I think, if we could figure out and implement this idea of like a community pool. I think, that's sort of like, again, like a couple of months away from us testing out and trying to implement.
Yeah. And then like in a year or so, you'll have layer 0 doing interchain messaging.
Right.
Doing on whatever the cheapest chain is.
It was a long time. I feel like last year I spent a lot of time just not even paying attention to what was happening in the crypto side, because we were sort of, I guess, more focused on business development and partnerships than anything, fundraising too. But now this year I've sort of been getting a lot back into it and paying more attention, and it does move at such a rapid rate, but it is pretty cool, the stuff that's coming out. The music NFT stuff is kind of interesting, and there's some really interesting stuff happening. And to your point, the idea of artists reinvesting back into artists, it's so cool to see that kind of community being built.
We just did an episode all on music NFTs, and very much the same. It's like, it's cool, it's primordial, probably not how it settles in the long run is the current iteration, but it's encouraging to see it, people just like wantonly experimenting, creating models.
Yeah, I still think probably the coolest one I've seen was like the Euler Beats NFTs, the generative ones, which was, I thought it was kind of like, it was the only one I've seen where it sort of felt like the NFT or the actual token economics side was actually like important. Like it actually, like, this is why something like this could exist, and the way that was leveraged. But you get the opposite effect, because then, if you wanted to buy it later, you're paying like 80 ETH to do it, which is just like, okay, that's not really sustainable pricing model for sort of artists. So it'll be interesting to see as it scales and there's more artists in the space. And I think they'll probably, like, some stuff's being priced at like 0.1 or whatever ETH right now. I think that'll probably go down as more people enter the space. But yeah, it'll be very different in a year's time than what it looks like right now.
For sure. I'm very excited to see how Paperchain develops. You've got a cheerleader on this team, at least, in me.
Me as well. Daniel, thank you so much for being here, man. And where can our listeners go first to sign up to be on Paperchain's waitlist, but also just to keep on track with what you guys are doing? Where can they follow you? Where can they follow the team?
So you can go paperchain.io is the website. And probably the best way to follow us is on Twitter, which is like paperchain.io with no dot, just paperchain.io. You can go to our Twitter and follow us, and that's probably where we're most active and have the biggest audience. So over the next couple of weeks, we're just sort of thinking about what like community-led product building looks like. We'll be doing some experiments around that. Actually, earlier today, we just published the paper token, which is kind of like, we're figuring out how that sort of fits into that community staking pool I mentioned, and sort of how we do like waitlist airdrops and things like that. So yeah, join the conversation on Twitter, and just love to get a bigger sense of, like, from your listeners, like how they're thinking about it and what really makes sense for them. And, we just really want to build something that makes sense and can solve a problem for a lot of people.
You heard the call to action right there from Daniel, gang. Get involved in the conversation, dig in, learn. I think that's a kind of a big key point that we've been making throughout this sort of arc on Web3 and music, has just been like the need to get involved in the conversation and to engage with it in order to learn. That's kind of the best way that you can throw yourself into this new world. So get involved. Definitely check out Paperchain. Go visit them, sign up. Daniel, thanks for being here, man.
Cheers, fellas. Appreciate it.
All right, Indies, we'll catch you guys next week on Creative Juice. Peace out.